welcome to another haunting episode of Homegrown History. I am Rebekah, Wolf Lady Davis, and I'm here with my co-host, Richard, the vampire who never truly ages, Martin.
I'm the oldest one here.
So he says. And we have a couple of very special guests today, Shane, the Nightwalker Black.
Hey.
And Jared Frankenstein Miller.
What's up, everybody?
Welcome to Homegrown Haunted History. This is officially our second annual episode of Homegrown History. We've made it to our second year. Can you believe we've been doing this for a year and a half now, Richard?
All right.
They're still letting us come in here and
That's
take over the mics, so that's good. Well, if you were with us last fall, then you may remember that we had a very special bonus episode of Homegrown History, and we had as our special guest Shane Black, who is a man of many hats, including Athens City Attorney and local attorney, but also author of Spirits of Athens. Is that right? I've got it right again.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And a leader of the Haunts Walks in Athens that go throughout the month of October. And we also have Jared Miller, who I'm not even going to tell you exactly what his connection to the ghost stories are, but I will say he runs the Limestone Legends Billiards on the square on Marion Street. His wife, Jessica, runs Broken Brush Studio 2 doors down, both on the east side of the square, which will come to play prominently in our stories today. So we've got a few ghost stories for you, and we're just going to jump right into it. But first, I want Richard to tell a little bit about the ghost stories you used to tell growing up as Boy Scouts.
Oh, yeah. We used to camp out on Elk River on the east side of the Elk River. The west side is Lauderdale County. And on that side, there's no camps or anything. But there's a cave up there, and we were always told there was a half Cajun and half a Cherokee man lived there called Big Fat Mad Sam. And Big Fat Mad Sam was always hungry, and he'd come around when you started cooking, he could smell it. And if you throw him a little food, he wouldn't bother you. But if you didn't throw him in food, you better watch out, he'll come get it. And he always carried a drum with him. It'd beat it, go boom, 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 boom. But Big Fat Mad Sam had a scar face. He fell into hot water, scalded when he was a little boy, and it hurt his arm, and he walks with a limp too. But Big Fat Mad Sam was really something to watch after, is what you do. So if you didn't have anything for him to eat, you better have something for him to eat. So you better watch out when you go down that part of Elk River.
So now, wasn't there some little boy who got so scared?
Well, yeah, we had one boy believed us and got pretty upset. And so he just picked up his sleeping bag and walked home.
Now, how far did he have to walk to get home?
He had to walk from Elk River to downtown Athens.
That's a good little haul.
And then, of course, we caught the Dickens for telling the story. You got to watch out for Big Fat Mad Sam, half Cajun, half Cherokee Indian.
I think I'd be more worried about the coyotes and whatever wild dogs running around through Clement's area. No offense to any Clement's boys, Shane. Than I would from Big Fat Bad Sam.
Mad Sam, yeah.
Well, you know, it's funny. That story actually segues. That's a great story, by the way. I love it. I'll be on the lookout for Big Fat Bad Sam next time I'm out on the river on my kayak.
Mad.
Oh, excuse me, Mad. I'm so sorry.
Big Fat Mad Sam.
Well, you know, when that boy was walking home, probably on Highway 72, he probably walked right past the next house I want to tell us about. So I know we've talked some about downtown Athens, but out in Clements, and more specifically Blue Springs area, there's a house that if you're headed out on Highway 72 West, before you get to one of the many Dollar Generals, the one there at Blue Springs, it's on the right. It's a farmhouse with a pointed window up top. And this was the first house that I ever heard of having ghosts, like from somebody I knew. When I was in 3rd grade, my art teacher, her name was Miss Lambert, and she lived in that house. And she said, yeah, there's something going on in that house. She said that a lot of times they'd just be sitting in the living room and look over, and that rocking chair would just be rocking all by itself. and they'd hear footsteps upstairs. And one night, her son woke up screaming, and she came running into his room. She's like, what's going on? He's like, there's a woman in my room. And she looked around. She said, there's no woman in your room. He said, there was a woman in my room. She was standing and looking over my bed. So, you know, you might think, okay, maybe that's just, you know, a dream, right? Well, in 2000, 22 years ago, when I was working for the News Courier, I was like, I'm going to get to the bottom of this as a cub reporter. So I went out to that house and I knocked on the door. And Jeff and Kathy Day were living there at the time. I don't know if they still live there, but they said, yeah, come on in. We'll tell you about the stories. And at first they're like, yeah, we don't believe in ghosts. But then they're like, well, you know, this house used to be in the Thatch community up near Ardmore, and it got moved out here years ago. But apparently at some point there was a family that had 3 little girls, and during one of the many pandemics or epidemics, you know, whether it was scarlet fever or malaria or something that came through Limestone County, all 3 little girls died. And so they said every now and then they would hear little footsteps running around upstairs, and their dog would look up the stairs and, you know, kind of watching something go by. But they decided that they liked little kids, so it's fine. They're not bothering anybody. But, you know, the thing that makes me think that Miss Lambert's son might not have just been dreaming was that Jeff and Kathy said that when their kids were living in the house, they had a son and a daughter. They were both like teenagers, which is how old Miss Lambert's son was too, whenever he saw that woman. One morning, their son came downstairs and asked his sister, why were you coming in my room last night? Mind your own business and stay in your own room. She's like, I didn't go to your room. I don't go to your stinky room. And he's like, I saw you. You were standing over my bed and you were looking at me. And she's like, it wasn't me. So I don't know. Maybe it's the mama looking for her kids. But that house has always been just a little bit creepy on the way out to 72. So those are 2 Clements area stories, but I want to spend the rest of our time, and believe it or not, Richard, I'm not going to do all the talking this time. Because we got a real good ghost story. Now, Shane, this is one you include on your Haunts Walks tours, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, this is one that we've included since the beginning. Sure.
Okay, well, I'm not even going to say anything more. I'm just going to let y'all take it away.
Well, you know, some of the best ghost stories that we have around here in Athens and Limestone have spilled out of traumatic events of our past. Mm-hmm. And so this story certainly does that. It meets that criteria. It occurred on March 20, 1893. There are some differing accounts about the story. There's places where they certainly agree. But I guess the best way to tell it is to first tell what happened in March 20 of 1893 and go from there. It's the middle of the night. Courthouse Square. Now, it didn't look exactly like it does now. You know, you had dirt roads there around it. You had a different courthouse there at the time. And there was a well. We're all familiar where the Confederate monument is. There was a well on that corner of the courthouse lawn. Train tracks, of course, still there. They were there. But the buildings around the square looked a little bit different. The same place that we're all familiar with. It's the middle of the night. Now, the town is not that big. You can stand in the middle of the town and walk to East Street and Houston Street, which was then called West Street, and you'd be at the borders of the town. So we're not talking about a very big town back there in the day, right?
That's right. That's right.
So it was in the middle of the night. It was about 2:30, 3 in the morning, quiet as could be. And someone was walking through the streets of town. Don't know what that someone was doing. But it might have been up to no good. I have no idea. But a man was walking through the streets of town, walking across back towards his house, when he noticed a fire on the east side of the square, smoke coming from a building and the light of a fire from the inside. Now, fire was not uncommon back in the days of the town. We've had lots of fires in the history of our town. You've had the north side, the east side, the courthouse, of course. And you don't have to even go back too many years ago here and remember the northeast corner of the courthouse.
Yeah.
But anyhow, he's walking through, he sees the fire, he starts yelling fire at the top of his lungs, starts screaming, fire, fire. There's a fire on this courthouse square. And people, this news quickly spreads throughout the town, and people are coming out of their houses, in their sleeping gowns and half awake, and they're rushing up to the square, and they're fire is on the east side of the square. Now, we're not sure exactly which building it was in on the east side of the square because some of those building footprints were different. But we know that it was somewhere on the east side of the square. And we know that the people immediately began to go through what was then a pattern. Now, we didn't have a fire department back in those days. What you did was you had a well in the courthouse square, and so you started forming a bucket brigade. You got your townsfolk together, and the whole town pitched in because the whole town's wealth was caught up with what's on the square, and so you're trying to save everything you can possibly save. So the townsfolk formed a bucket brigade. They began grabbing the water and forming it down, and they bust into the store, and they're throwing it on the fire. They're throwing it on the fire. Well, there's no firewalls back during this period of time of any significance. And these buildings would go up, and they knew that would happen if they didn't take immediate action to do what they could to stop the fire. But the fire begins to spread, and it spreads from building to building very rapidly. And at some point during this time of trying to put out the fire beginning to catch to the other buildings, the townsfolk beginning to realize that they needed to focus their efforts less on putting out the fire and more on trying to save everything they could on the east side of the square, that some people who were outside noticed in the upstairs window of this building that had caught fire the silhouettes of two men who apparently had been trapped in the building and were now caught upstairs in the fire. Now, this is where some of the accounts differ in our story from folks even during that period. But one group of people insists that who these two folks were these were two young men who had been sleeping in the building overnight. Back during that time, you didn't really have a police force or a fire department like what we've got now. So what folks would do, storekeepers would hire young men to stay in the buildings and sleep there overnight. And they kind of became the guards, the security guards for it. Well, these two guys had fallen asleep and they woke up. And by the time they woke up, all the excitement and everything was going on, and they couldn't get downstairs, and the room's becoming clogged with smoke. And so they run to the front of the building and begin to beat on the windows. And the people looking from below see them silhouetted up against these windows, beating on the windows. Now the guys knock the windows out, and they start screaming and yelling to the people below. Now I got to tell you, sometimes this story gets a little harsh, and sometimes in telling this story on these haunt walks, it kind of tone it down a little bit because of what happens next. But I'll give you all the unfiltered version. The accounts are that the men are screaming upstairs for help from the folks below. But by this time, the fire is so intense and it is so blistering that the people are unable to approach the buildings to even get ladders up to them. And so the people are forced to watch below as these young men are consumed by fire, screaming, and that the men were screaming for someone to shoot them to put them out of their misery.
That's right.
And then they die. They're consumed by flame and they die. It was a terrible, terrible fire. Before it was put out, it consumed the entire eastern side of the square. And no building on that side was left untouched. If you're walking around the Athens Square and you stop at one of those wonderful brick markers and see some of those images on there, and I know,
we see them every day.
You see it, yeah. You look at that one in the upper right-hand corner. It is an image of this scene the next day, the day after the fire. And you'll see the street is full of goods. It's full of boxes. It's full of shoes.
Yes,
where people have burst through those stores on either side and have pulled out all the goods that they can. And in the catacombs that are left, the charred remains of the buildings on the east side, smoldering husks, and all that was left were just sort of the bricks, the anchors that didn't just get consumed like they would.
Exactly the photo you're talking about.
Rebekah, you had handed me an article from the newspaper, which was published on March 25th, 5 days later. And the headline is, "Terrible is the calamity which befell our town on Monday morning. The east side of the square, a mass of ruins. William Chandler and Oscar Brown give up their lives while fighting a sea of fire." And Rebekah, you asked me to, and I'm happy to read just a little bit of this.
Well, it's just so flowery the way they wrote.
We don't write like this in the newspaper. Now you got to think that what had just happened justified this kind of flowery language. This was terrible tragedy. But here's how they described it: Once more is Athens a sufferer from the ruthless flames. On last Monday, the town was startled from its slumbers by the soul-harrowing cry of fire. Hastily were the garments donned, and rapidly did the throng congregate until the public square was a mass of humanity, ready, willing, and anxious to save the property of those endangered from the devastating monster which when once under headway consumes all within its path. We are powerless to describe the awful grandeur and majesty of the devouring element as it wrapped in its embrace one after another of the buildings on the east side of the square. Unable are we to faithfully depict the gallant work of the men, women, and children in their noble unselfishness to serve. Were the individual instances of heroism cited, it would fill every column of this paper. Everyone did what he or she conceived to be his or her duty. Gallant were the efforts to arrest the progress of the fire, but they were of little avail. With the roar of a hurricane, the fiery monster sped its way until the firewall of Dr. J.R. Hoffman's bookstore, assisted by the valiant services of the water brigade, arrested it in its course of destruction.
Wow.
That's powerful language.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful language. That was what happened, and those two guys gave up their lives. Now,
before we get into what's happening now, because Richard has a connection to this story. Tell us, Richard.
Well, William Chandler is my great uncle, and he came to Athens from McKinsey, Tennessee, to go to the agriculture school, and he was paid at night to stay in the buildings, as he said, and to keep the furnace going during the wintertime, but watch out for fires. And that's how he got in the building. And Oscar was doing the same thing, is what I was told. And they couldn't get him out, and then walls caved in on him, and they were trying to shoot him because they were burning up. And the fire was so hot they couldn't. But later on, as the fire got out, they found their bodies, and all they could recognize was his the tie rack and cufflinks of his. The other part of his body they couldn't recognize because it burned so. And then, of course, the next day, my grandmother had him put on the train. They sent him back to McKinsey, Tennessee, to be buried. So that was my great uncle.
Well, and they put Oscar. Now, Oscar was a young black man.
Yeah, he was the African-American man. They put him on the same train and dropped him off at Vito. That's where he was put in the ground. And then Oscar went on up to Nashville and then to McKinsey, is what they did. But William was down here earning some money and going to that new agriculture school, which was a very outstanding school.
Right, which was the predecessor to Athens High School.
Right.
So do you remember your family talking about this story when you were growing up? Did your grandmother ever talk about it? Because that was her little brother, wasn't it?
Right. My grandmother was dead before I was born. And my mother just mentioned that she lost an uncle in that fire. And I was a little boy. I didn't pay no attention.
Right.
Yeah.
But till I read the paper and saw that.
Just came down here to try and make a better life, didn't he?
That's right. That's right.
Sad. I didn't want to interrupt you too much, but I didn't want us to get into too much to modern day before we talked about this connection here.
But what you're saying is true as to where you are telling the story.
Well, some of the accounts differ a little bit, but you hear from folks that have remembered their grandparents telling them about being there on the street.
Yes.
That night.
Yeah.
And how horrible it was, and how the two men couldn't be saved.
Right. Buzz Estes' father was there.
Is that right?
Pete Estes. His granddad had a store, and he's the one that told me about the story.
Right?
How my great uncle died. The wall caving in on and all that, and burning up alive. And they couldn't shoot him because he's covered up so much.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
So
that's the history. So let's talk about what happens now.
Well, and I do want to drop this other additional footnote about this, just because I think it's interesting to all of us that are also just fans of the history of Athens, is that this was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back on why we have Athens Utilities and Athens Water Service.
That's exactly right.
This fire was so terrible, there had been a series of fires, and according to the histories, after this incident, the townsfolk finally got with their state legislators, which is how it had to be done back in the day, in order to borrow the money to build a waterworks to pump water from the spring right down the hill where the tourism office is located today.
That's correct.
Yes.
With a pump in the basement of that building and pump it up to the Athens Square so it could be used to put out fires. And that old, pump house and that original pump and all of that is the genesis of what is now Athens Utilities.
That's right. Well, and I know we have a picture of the fire at the archives, so I'll put that in the show notes. I know exactly the picture you're talking about with the buildings, the skeletons of the buildings stretching toward the sky. Oh, yeah. And we also have some pictures that show that first water tank. It was old school 1900, water tank right there in downtown, and that's how they were able to protect those buildings. It's never burned quite like that since.
Well, and I suppose now we move on sort of to the rest of the story, right? That makes this from being a terrible and yet interesting historical note to why we're talking about it today on the Ghost Story podcast. Let's fast forward now to the 1980s. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now we don't have kids hanging out and being paid to hang out there overnight upstairs in the square. Now we got kids cruising the square. Right, that's right. So they're there a lot of the night.
You say they like it wasn't you.
Oh no, I was totally there. I was there. I was a part of the group. I cruised the square in the late 80s.
I'm not gonna tell you what.
Richard, I know you were there too, a little bit earlier than that.
Oh Lord. Go ahead.
Yeah. This anecdote comes from two guys that cruised the square a lot. And they were two guys from out of Clements area, as a matter of fact.
Clements people always
get in trouble.
One of them wasn't a black.
No, it wasn't. I know the one you're talking about. I know. Last name black. Wasn't the one you're thinking about. Could have been, though.
Could have.
These two guys were on the east side of the courthouse square. And back during the day, of course, for those listeners that don't know this, aren't familiar with this, for many, many years, teenagers in Athens cruised the square. Just like you would hear teenagers doing in any small town, they'd get in their cars and they'd come. And the great thing about it is you'd meet folks from other schools within the county. So you'd have Elkmont High School kids, Ardmore kids, Clements High School, Tanner, East Limestone, name them all. Athens High School kids, of course, and everybody would be down there sort of congregating and getting to know each other. And it was quite a social scene,
Oh, yeah.
Football teams would go off and they'd win and they'd come back and they'd circle around the square honking their horns while the teenagers cheered. Oh, it's great. It's fantastic. Until it got a little bit out of hand in the early 90s, and then Mayor Williams shut it down because of property damage it was causing. Right. And it's never really started back up, which is a shame.
Right.
But this story comes from two regulars on the east side of the courthouse. One night, sitting on the back of their tailgate. And they're sitting there. And back in the late 80s, the square would close down, so to speak, around 1 or 2. And if you were still up there that late, and I wasn't, I was long gone, I had curfew way before that.
Right.
But if you were up there at 1 or 2, it would eventually become a time when the police officers would come around and tell everybody to go on home.
Go home.
And so this was getting really close to that time. And these two guys are on the east side and sitting on the back tailgate, two very good buddies, and they were sitting there, two trucks pulled up next to each other. One of them's, they're sitting on their tailgates. And they were saying their goodbyes to each other for the night. And, good to see you tonight, see you tomorrow night, kind of thing. And they were turning around to get in their trucks. And as they did, one of them looks back over his shoulder or just around the square. If you've ever been up at the square like really, really late at night, when it's empty, it echoes.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes,
you can clap your hands and you can hear it. I mean, it is kind of eerie. I mean, it's got quite an echo on it.
Yeah.
So these guys are up there and they hear something, like they hear noise. And look over on the east side, and there, in one of the buildings in the middle, in a window on the second floor of the building, which narrows down the buildings and which windows you can see in the 80s. And they look up and they see something in the window, like a flashlight, some sort of light from inside. They continue to watch this thing, and the light grows brighter and brighter until it appears that what they're seeing is like a fire, like the glow of a fire. And this was, I understand that this was at the time of the year where it might not be unusual to have a fireplace, so, they're just kind of looking. They hadn't noticed it before, and these guys said, "Hey, man, do you see that up there?" And he says, the other guy turns and says, "Yeah, what is that? Is that a candle? Is that a fire or something? Is somebody up there at a fireplace?" As they watched this, they said the fire continued to intensify. It got bright. And so they began to see smoke kind of start trailing off from the outside of the building, kind of there by the outside of the window, until it became apparent to them that
It's a fire.
It's a fire. And they saw something moving around in there behind the window. But it was clear it was a fire. And so they got really excited. Now, just 2 blocks north at the time was the fire station. So these guys, they jump in one of the trucks and they take off, just hauling it. And 2 blocks to the north, they get out, they're beating on the door of the firehouse. Fireman comes to the door and says, "Man, there's a fire on the square." Now, okay, again, this was before cell phones. They didn't try to call 911. They didn't have fire station 2 blocks north. They run up there, they beat on the door. The fireman comes to the door and says, "There's a fire on the square. We saw a fire in the 2nd story window." So the fireman like, "All right, well, we'll get it together. We'll be right there." And so firemen get in that truck and make the 2-block trip. And they come right down there really quick. Pull up right on the block. The boys pull up behind them. They're pointing up the window, and they look. Everybody gets out and they look. There's nothing. They ain't seeing nothing. Nothing in the window.
Nothing in the window.
The boys insist. They say, "Oh no, look, there was a fire. You could see the glow of the fire. We saw the smoke. There was something moving around in there." And the fireman said, "All right, well, y'all stand back. We'll check it out. Could be something that's going out and coming back. That's fine. Could be gas or something coming on it." So they jimmy the lock and they run in there and they run upstairs. And the boys are standing around downstairs. They stood down there for 10 minutes. Nothing. And then finally, these 3 firemen that went up there, they come down. He said it was an older fireman and there was 2 younger guys. And that one of the younger guys was hot. He said, "There is no fire up there. There's nothing up there. Y'all making a false report. Y'all messing with us. Getting us to come down here and say it's not funny at all. I'm going to call the police officers. Hey," he told us, go radio the police officer. I mean, y'all boys, y'all don't go anywhere,
Right.
Well, the boys scared to death. No, sir, we did. We promised you when we saw the fire. And so while they're standing there talking, apparently the older fireman said, "Man, can I talk to you for just a second?" Talking to the younger guy that was so hot. And kind of pulled him off to the side, but not so far away to where the boys couldn't hear. And said, "Now look," said, "it's not unusual for us to get a report from the east side of the square that there's a fire. And if you arrest these boys for this, you're going to have to cite other people too, because this ain't the first time that they cite." And indeed, that was the case. It is not unusual for the Athens Fire Department and 911 now to receive calls and reports about a fire on the east side of the square, that people have seen smoke coming from the buildings or have seen fire in the windows at night, but when they go to check it out, there's nothing there. Now they go every time, but you talk with some of the folks, they say, "Oh yeah, we get reports of that from there and we go check them out, but there's never anything there." Sometimes, not only do they have reports of fire, but every now and then there is a call that will come in that claims that there are 2 men upstairs that are beating on the windows trying to get out.
Amen.
And that's the story of the east side.
So I guess that's where
I
I
we
come
brought
in.
Jared in here for a reason.
So my name is Jared Miller.
Yes.
I run Limestone Legend Billiards on the east side of the square. And my wife, Jess, owns the Broken Brush Art Studio. So these buildings are basically side by side. There's a small antique shop that separates them, but they're basically side by side. So we put security systems in both of our buildings a couple years ago. And we started getting hits on the motion sensor on these cameras. They're very good cameras. I mean, you can zoom in and see almost everything in the building. Well, we started getting motion sensing lights that would go off, and we're like, well, there shouldn't be anybody in there. So I go through and look at all the footage and everything. Sure enough, nothing's on there, but these motion sensors are going off. So I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. Well, then after that, this is in the Broken Brush. So then after that, lights started coming on in the building. We had black lights that were plugged into the wall. The only way that they would turn on, there's like the little click thing that you push forward, like on the little Christmas decorations usually that you have, or the little night lights. And the only way those lights would turn on was that little clicker. So we would come in the morning, these black lights would be on. And there's no way to turn them on beside these little clickers. And we would see that happen on the camera, which the camera would only catch it after the light had turned on, not before it happened. So I started paying a little bit closer attention to the lights on the cameras. So fast forward a couple weeks, starts doing it again. Well, I start seeing little spirit orbs. If you're familiar with Ghost Hunters or any supernatural show, they always see the little spirit orbs that go everywhere.
Right?
That's like a little light.
Yeah, like a little ball of light.
Okay.
And it's very easy to distinguish that from dust or a bug because of the flight patterns they take. And the more you watch these little videos, you're like, okay, you can kind of tell the difference. So I started seeing these little light orbs that would come from the ceiling, would go down, and would shoot left or right. And we'd actually got a couple of little paranormal research things like you see them use on TV. And sure enough, all these little things we got, we're getting interactions with. We would put these little balls, the only way they would light up is by touch or by move. Well, we were in the broken brush and asked, is anyone here with us? We have some lights that you can turn on. On command, lights lit up.
Wow.
So I set 3 balls on the table. I'm like, this might just be somebody's moving, or like there's no way this is,
Sure.
the light's going off. So I'm going to set 3 and ask it to light the one on the left up. Sure enough, I say, if you're here with us, first I ask if you're a female, will you light the right ball up? A couple minutes, nothing. So then I say, if you're a male, will you light the left ball up? It probably wasn't 5 seconds that ball lit up.
Oh,
just
wow.
the left one. And all 3 of these balls are within probably 6 or 7 inches of each other. So if it was a vibration or something, they all 3 would have lit
Sure.
up. So,
Wow.
yeah, so it's kind of crazy. And then after that, just to make sure, we're not crazy, I put another little click light up that goes in the bottom of one of our ceramics that Jessica paints. And the only way this light will turn on is for that click to
Sure.
be flipped forward. And it's not easy. Like a child probably couldn't even do it. It has to be clicked forward. Sure enough, I put that on there. I get home and I get a motion sense on my camera. I pull it up, nothing happens. So you can talk through these cameras on your phone. So I'm like, okay, I was like, I'm just for giggles, we're going to talk and see if it'll turn the light on. I mash the button down and I say, hey, if you're in there, can you turn the light on to let us know where, you're there? Light turns on automatically on my voice. And I have some of these posted on my Facebook page. And we also started a page called North Alabama Paranormal Investigations.
Wow.
And I saw your video.
Yeah.
I'll see if we can link to that too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So because Jared's been sharing some of these videos on the, I guess on the
my,
Broken Brush
my
page.
personal Facebook
Yeah,
page,
personal,
but we're
yeah.
we're gonna put it on that paranormal
Paranormal.
page that we have,
So you can watch and judge for yourself. Now, Jess says when funky things start going on in the studio, she starts saying, "Okay, William, I hear you."
Yeah, absolutely. 'Cause we have lights that come on. You can hear footsteps at night. You're on the square at night late. We both work late usually. I own the
Sure.
pool hall, so we don't close until about midnight or 1 a.m. So it's kind of eerie anyway. So usually you're like, it's just my mind playing tricks on me. But the more and more it happens, you're like, okay, this is kind
Right.
of something going on.
Does it ever make you feel kind of funny to be up there?
I get
stuff?
goosebumps a lot. I'm not gonna lie. We get goosebumps a lot.
I got a solution.
Oh, boy. Leave it to Richard, the oldest one here.
I got a solution. The Chandler family loved fruitcake.
Oh,
Okay.
that's right.
And we make fruitcake after Thanksgiving.
I have had Richard's fruitcake. It is amazing and dangerous.
And I'm sure that's what he's looking for. So what we need to do is cut some pieces and take
Absolutely.
them up there.
Yeah.
And it's got George Dickel whiskey in it, so you have to be
Plus, it's
careful.
dangerous.
But let's do that, and
Yeah.
let's see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the Chandler family just love fruitcake.
Absolutely, we'll do that. And then another story connecting with the billiards hall. So again, I would get those cameras would start going off, and this is a 2-story building, like Shane was talking about. It may not be the same building, it may, but it's one of the only 2-story buildings on that side of the square, so it very well could be. I have the downstairs, and upstairs there's a medical office. So my cameras would start going off, and I would hear footsteps. I'm like, the guys, they work overnight there sometimes, so it's probably somebody upstairs walking around. Well, then I start getting these orbs in the bottom of the pool hall, but the only place they are is towards the front of the building, and they go down in front of the camera into the wall. They're nowhere else in that building besides that very front section there. So we were telling the guy that rents the upstairs, Brady, we were talking to him, and he was like, he's like, I didn't want to tell anybody this because I didn't want them to think I was crazy. He's like, but we had a meeting upstairs, and I had a nurse walk out and leave because we were having a meeting, and there was a stone, like a little pebble, thrown at her, and said everybody was sitting there, and she felt that stone hit her, and everybody was in the conference talking like we are here now, so it couldn't have been anybody else, and said it spooked her so bad that she left.
Wow.
She left the little conference they had. And he said that he's heard footsteps and everything up there too, which we haven't investigated upstairs yet because we didn't know any of this until about 2 nights ago before this podcast, which is, it's kind of coming full circle now.
Right.
So that's definitely something we're going to have to check out, is that upstairs.
Wow.
So.
Okay, well, there you have it, folks.
If it's Oscar, we'll have to do something else.
I know. We kind of know who William was, but now I want to know more about Oscar Brown.
Right.
If he was up from the Vito area and had come down here.
From.
Also to make a life in the big city of Athens.
Right.
In the meantime, if you're going to bring William some fruitcake, don't tell me where it is because I might sneak over from the archives and get me a piece. I know.
Show up and it'll
it's
be
right
gone.
behind it'll be gone. I'll be like, must be the ghost. I can't imagine.
The aroma of the fruitcake will bring him out.
That's right. That's exactly right. And if he starts stumbling instead of footstepping, he got too much of that George Dickel.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your stories. And I'm just proud to be able to share some of these stories with everybody and let y'all make up your own minds about what you believe. But hopefully, we'll be back again here next fall for another episode of Homegrown Haunted History.